From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. First up today, one last go-round on crop pest problems in Kansas. For this rapidly concluding growing season, K-State's Jeff Whitworth talks about pre-harvest damage to soybean stands by the Dectes Stem Borer. He also has some thoughts on fall-time management of alfalfa weevils. Then K-State's Doug Jardine tells why right after harvest is an ideal time to test for cyst nematodes in soybean fields. Later, Kansas FFA State reporter Riley Sleichter will file the first of his reports this week from the 2017 National FFA Convention in Indianapolis. And with this week's Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven. All right here on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
There are still a few insect issues out there in our crop fields to consider, and we'll cover those now once again with Jeff Whitworth alongside crop entomologist, K-State Research and Extension. And one of these, maybe it's starting to wind down, Jeff, but we wanted to mention it nonetheless. For soybean growers out there, they may find as they finish up those last fields this harvest, issues with the Dectes Stem Borer causing harvest complications. What's the story?
Yes, the stem borer has been around in soybeans since about 1985, and I say that because prior to that, the Dectes Stem Borer has affected sunflowers. It is a native insect to Kansas. It's in the wild growing sunflowers, and prior to 1985, it was only limited to domestic sunflowers, or the ones that we plant, plus the native sunflowers. In 1985, for some reason, it transitioned over into soybeans and has caused more problems in soybeans since then than it does really in sunflowers. Number one, because we have more soybeans around the state than we do have sunflowers, and sunflowers have larger stems, takes a little more tunneling and therefore a little more wind usually to blow them over. But they can cause lodging because they have this unique habit of tunneling around just around the base of the plant just prior to harvest. So the Dectes Stem Borer transitioned into soybeans right about 1985 and primarily affects the western two-thirds of the state from about 75 Highway west. Now, I just got some reports just last week, actually, that they picked up some lodged soybean plants in the eastern part of the state, and those were verified as being lodged or girdled by the stem borer. So maybe it is moving into the southeastern part of the state also, which is really kind of strange because the Dectes soybean stem borer has been and is a very serious pest throughout the southeastern part of the United States. In South Carolina, North Carolina, Louisiana, Missouri, Arkansas, but not southeastern Kansas. We haven't been able to figure out why that is, but there's just been that little pocket in the southeastern quadrant of the state where they haven't affected soybeans. But the western two-thirds of the state, they can be a serious pest. These stem borers overwinter in the base of a sunflower or a soybean plant as a larva. Then in the spring, they become active as it starts to warm up, and the adults in soybeans at least will start emerging right around the 4th of July. That's been characteristic for about the last 15 years. Right around the 4th of July, the adults emerge, and they'll spend a week or two gathering together around the edges of the fields where they mate, and then they disperse through the soybean fields. One of the management techniques that we've tried is during this period of time, once they start emerging, you have this 10-day to 14-day period of time to try and just spray around the border of the field to try and control the adults before they disperse to lay eggs. Anyway, that's tough to do. It's tough to time, and you got to have a lot of growers cooperating at the same time, because they are so mobile. The adults are very mobile. They take off flying, and they spend the next 6 to 8 weeks in ovipositing or laying eggs in soybean fields. One of the questions we get is if you rotate crops, does that help? It doesn't, just because they're so mobile. They will find a soybean field, and they'll fly to it, and they'll oviposit. So they oviposit. As the season progresses, then you'll see a petio here and a petio there die on the plant. It's pretty obvious to see which plants are infested, because you'll see a dead petio this week, 2 weeks later 2, and then 3, and then eventually that larvae will find its way down to the main stem. They are cannibalistic, so if there's more than one, it will kill or eat the others until at the end of the year, just before harvest. You'll end up with one larva down in the main stem where they girdle the plant, and the plant then will fall over if you get a wind, which we have seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks here, getting more and more reports of plants being girdled and lodging.
Can this be distinguished, Jeff, easily from, say, a disease, charcoal rot or otherwise, which could also cause lodging in soybeans?
Yes, very easily. If you look at the base of the plant, it looks beveled. It's really a nice, neat cut. And that's a great question, because I get a lot of questions from growers and consultants where they send pictures in, and it's very easily distinguished. It looks like somebody just cut it with a knife. But if you look at the base of the plant, then it will be stuffed with frass, because the larvae will be down in the base in the ground, and it close off the top with frass, and the plant falls over. A lot of the growers then, if they've had this problem before, they will plant narrower rows to try and hold the plants up, or they'll broadcast plant, or they'll do something, maybe increase the plant populations, something to try and hold the plants up, because right now we don't have any management techniques. Now, the thing is, the conventionally planted soybeans, they're pretty much being harvested or have been harvested. What we're seeing now are the double crop beans still to come. Those are infested also, so we're just starting to see some lodging due to Dectes Stem Borer and some of the double crop beans. So what we hope for is good growing conditions and then good harvesting conditions. So once these fields that have been infested are identified as being infested, they can be harvested just as soon as they reach physiological maturity, or as soon as they reach a harvestable developmental stage, to get them out of the field before they do fall over. Because once they fall over, you can pick up the seeds, but it's really difficult. You got to go slow, and if they do lay on the ground very long, they're subject to rodents and pathogens and all kinds of stuff. So the Dectes Stem Borer, if you haven't experienced the devastation that they can cause, you're lucky, because they do cause, if you've seen a field that's been lodged, it is a sick-looking field, and there's really not much you can do about getting that harvest picked up.
So once again, take note of the damage that was inflicted by the Dectes Stem Borer on your soybeans. Store that information away, for it may well be back in your next round of soybeans in the growing season 2018. And Jeff, a quick word here on opportunities to get one's alfalfa weevil control going, again, in anticipation of the next growing season, with some sort of management activity here in the late fall?
Yes, the last 5 or 6 years I've gotten a lot of calls about fall spraying for alfalfa weevils, because alfalfa weevils are such a serious pest in the spring. And if the weather doesn't cooperate, they're really tough to treat for in the spring, because of the cold temperatures and those moisture events that we have. So a lot of guys are interested in spraying right now. Right now, the alfalfa weevils are moving back into the alfalfa fields from where they've spent the summer, or they have been for the last couple of weeks, and they will continue to move back into alfalfa fields for the next probably couple of weeks. And then they will start mating and start laying eggs in the alfalfa stems. So that seems like, on the face of it, a good time to spray to kill the adults before they lay the eggs. Therefore, you don't have the following problem in the spring. That sounds good, but we have tried it for a couple of years. Other folks have tried it for a couple of years. You can reduce the population. The problem is when, if you're going to spray your field, the insecticides last 2 to 3 weeks for their activity, their residual activity. These weevils are moving back, and they're moving around in these alfalfa fields from now. Anytime the temperature's over 45 degrees, they're laying eggs throughout the winter. So it's tough to time. The insecticides work, but it's tough to time when it's actually going to do it. So we've done several years' worth of large-scale studies where we've sprayed in the fall, different timings, and then gone back and evaluated it in the spring. Statistically, it's worked okay, but from a practical standpoint, all of the fields that we've sprayed in the fall still had to be sprayed at the same time all the other fields that weren't sprayed had to be, because from a practical standpoint, it still was over the treatment threshold. So, yes, it makes you feel good to do it in the fall, or flaming, or any of those other type management activities, but it just doesn't pay off in the spring, where it has reduced the alfalfa weevil population to the point where they're not causing economic damage.
So one might as well basically wait until springtime, assess where they're at, and then they can exact their control program accordingly based on the counts they're making then.
Yes, we just don't recommend it just because it has not been consistent enough. Now, if you want to graze your alfalfa, or you want to do these other management cultural practices and it fits into your schedule, by all means. It doesn't hurt anything, and if it helps reduce them a little bit, I'm all for it. But it just hasn't reduced them consistently enough below the treatment thresholds that we recommend this.
Very well. Well, Jeff, once again, we appreciate the input on what's going on, even at this late hour by the season's clock, in crop production and insect activity, and we'll talk again soon. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Eric.
That's a word on Dectes Stem Borer damage in soybean crops, particularly those double crop beans yet to be harvested, and the notion of controlling alfalfa weevil in the fall, which, as Jeff notes, is probably best left to the springtime instead. Jeff Whitworth is a crop entomologist, K-State Research and Extension, and we'll return in a moment on this Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today. For you corn and soybean growers, some thoughts toward the end of the harvest season now on nematode management. Looking ahead to next production season, joining us is Doug Jardine, row crop disease specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Doug, as we look at anything and everything that may be going on out there right now in these row crops, soybean cyst nematode still prominent in Kansas, and we'll open by noting that this is a prime time to test for that right now, correct?
Well, that's right, Eric. And just to refresh people's minds, a few years ago, the Kansas Soybean Commission funded a statewide survey. And the results of that 2-year study was that about 20% of all soybean fields in the state of Kansas have some level of soybean cyst nematode in. Now, 20% may or may not seem high depending on your point of view, but keep in mind, for instance, in Cherokee County, that number was 95% of the fields. In Donovan County, it was 75%, and there were a few other counties that were over 50%. So depending on where you live, that number is significantly higher than the statewide average. So to your question about now being a good time to sample, the reason for that is the soybean cyst nematode, because it forms these cysts on the roots that slough off and fall back into the soil, they don't move. So we can talk about other nematodes here in a few minutes, but they stay where they fall. So they're typically going to be in the top 2 to 4 inches of the soil. And therefore, any time is a good time to test for soybean cyst nematode, but right after harvest is a particularly good time because, A, people have time. Mm-hmm. They're done for the season. They're not worried about working ground necessarily, or the wheat's in the ground, or hopefully, and, it's almost time for resting. The other reason for that is when you can see the rows where the rows were, that is the best place to take your soil test, because where are those cysts going to be concentrated? Around the old root system. Mm-hmm. And so if we can see the rows, we go out with our soil probe in our bucket and we take a Z pattern or a W pattern or whatever we want to use across the field and collect those 15 or 20 soil cores. We want to be putting that soil probe directly in the old row.
It's a more representative sample then in
yes.
the end. Right.
The other thing is that, guys are used to going 3 to 6 inches for a fertility sample. For nematode sampling, we want to go 6 to 8 inches. So it's a little bit deep, but for that reason, it's a good time. Now, what I just described is probably for fields that are known to be infested, and we're trying to get a handle on our numbers going up or down. The other possibility is you have a field, you have no idea if the nematode's out there. And there we want to do a little bit different type of pattern for sampling. We know from experience that nematodes are most often going to be found on headlands where they've fallen off of infested equipment that's been coming from another field, and we get some of that soil falling off on the headlands. Terraces in fields where water flows. We know nematodes can flow with the water, and so the terraces or other low spots in the field are a good place to look. We know to a certain extent it can be blown in blowing soil on high wind days, and so maybe along the edges of fields are also a good place to look. So those were areas that you could concentrate on, or just you have a place in the field that just seems to perform poorly.
Mm-hmm.
And especially,
you're not sure why then.
And especially if you notice that in corn years, it doesn't seem to be too bad, but in soybean years, it is. So those would be good places to concentrate your sampling on rather than making it more random. So for those reasons, now is a pretty good time.
And then we'll talk about if one gets their test results back and it indicates a nematode problem in their soybeans, planning for management. You mentioned the corn nematode, and conversely, you stressed, Doug, now is not the time to take a sample for that pest.
Right. Because the nematodes that are going to infest corn, which are primarily root lesion nematode, depending on where you're at in the state, sting nematode, stubby root nematode, these are the ones that we typically associate as being problems in cornfields. Those nematodes are mobile. And typically, as the plant dies, as it reaches maturity, those nematodes will leave the root area and they will go down into a deeper level of the soil profile, probably below the 8-inch level that we're normally used to sampling at. And so if we go out this time of year, we may be missing a lot of the nematodes. If the field is just super infested, it's probably going to show up in the soil test one way or another just because of the massive numbers. But there may be fields where they're borderline or they're just high enough for some yield loss, and as they move out of the upper soil profile down the lower, we're going to miss them. And so I would say that any soil sampling done for corn nematodes this time of year, if it's positive, it's positive, but anything that would be negative, I would actually say is inconclusive because it just may be poor time. So probably the better time to be sampling for corn nematodes, if we're going to rely on soil sampling, would be in mid to late March. Those nematodes, as the soils are starting to warm up, will come back up near the surface. But the best time for corn is really about 30 days after corn emergence. And we've talked about this before, particularly the root lesion nematode is going to be in the roots. And so the best way to sample it for that is to actually dig up whole plants and send them in. And we do an incubation procedure on the root system. And we will give you a number that's called number of nematodes per gram of root. Anything over several thousand would be considered pretty high, and anything under 1,000 would be pretty low. The problem with that is you're already into the season.
Right.
We don't have any remedial nematode treatments, and so you're kind of stuck for that year. But with that knowledge, then you can plan for future years and future rotations with what you can do. So, encourage cyst nematode sampling this time of year, discourage corn nematode sampling or sorghum nematodes for that matter too.
All right. Well, back to the soybean cyst nematode then. If one once again receives information back that suggests they do have an SCN issue, what to think about in regard to the next growing season?
Well, first of all, let's talk about what would be considered a significant number, and that's going to depend on soil type. So the sandier the soil, the fewer nematodes you have to have out there to be causing you a problem. If you get a test back that says they found 300 eggs and juveniles per half a cup of soil, it's 100 cc's, but that's about a half a cup, and it's a pretty sandy soil, you probably have a yield-limiting problem. On the other hand, if that's a pretty fine clay, you're probably not having any real economic issues. In those heavier soils, when we get up to numbers maybe 1,000 eggs and juveniles per half a cup of soil, we're probably going to start to see some noticeable yield loss. So those numbers are a little bit variable, but we try and take that into consideration when we send you back your recommendation. Now, having said that, let's assume that you've got a fairly high count. There's generally a couple of different ways that you can treat the problem. Historically, we've always said, well, just plant a resistant variety. And again, we've talked about this before, but to remind people, 99.9% of all varieties use the same genetic source of resistance. And putting that kind of pressure on the nematodes, they are starting to develop some resistance to our resistant varieties. And it's kind of all over the board. The information that companies provide don't tell you how that particular variety is going to perform with the population of nematodes in your field. Because one variety that does great in Shawnee County may do terrible down in Pratt County. And that's not in the information that the companies provide. So that information comes primarily from experience and from having a good soil testing program in known infested fields so that you know if your numbers are going up and down. What we would suggest to people is never, ever plant the same variety in the same field twice ever. Every time that field's scheduled to be in soybeans, whether you're in continuous soybeans or every other year, every other third year, you need to plant a different variety. And that will help to some extent. Crop rotation has not proven to be particularly efficient in dealing with the nematode in Kansas. Our soils get pretty cold in the wintertime, and those predators that would feed on nematodes in the soil and help drive those numbers down are not particularly active. Now, you go down to Mississippi or Texas or Louisiana, rotation works really well. But as you get farther north and the soils are colder during the wintertime, that becomes less effective. So that leads us with potentially a third management tool. There are a number of seed treatment nematicides that are being produced by companies.
These are newcomer products, are they not?
These are new products, and typically they are biocontrol agents. They are certain types of bacteria that are known to be predaceous on the nematodes. And I would not tell people not to use them. But let's just say that in university trials, we don't have a lot of data that would say yes or no, that they're great products or not so great. Where we do have data, they're somewhat inconsistent. I can show one test where they seem to work great, another test, the results are not very good. Why those differences are, we don't know yet. But, if people truly have a nematode problem, I would encourage them to try the product. Maybe take a field that's fairly uniform in slope and drainage and fertility, and split the field in half, use the product on one half of the field, leave the other half untreated, and look at your yield maps at the end of the season and see if you think it makes a difference. And that would be the way to evaluate those products at this point in time.
On a limited basis, then.
Yeah, for now.
Yeah. Very good. Well, this is the time, once again, via a soil test for nematode presence, for soybeans, that is, to see where you stand with regard to this pest. So get out there, producers, and take care of this while the time is afforded. Doug, we appreciate the comments. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That from Doug Jardine. He's a row crop disease specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Things to think about with regard to nematode management in soybeans and in corn. You're listening to Agriculture Today. We'll return in a moment on this, the K-State Radio Network. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Welcome back to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Well, officially, later this morning, the 2017 National FFA Convention gets rolling in Indianapolis. Of course, there's quite a contingent of Kansas FFA members in attendance and participating, including our guest now. He joins us via phone from the convention floor. He is the current state FFA reporter, Riley Sleichter. He is from the Abilene FFA chapter originally. And Riley, Thanks for joining us for a few moments, and already there's been quite a bit going on with convention activities in a preliminary sense, you say.
Correct, yeah. Well, good morning, Eric. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Sure.
So far, we've actually had quite a few activities going on, even before conventions even started. So this past weekend, our national officer candidate, Kyler Langbart, it was announced on Tuesday that he will be advancing to the final round for the national officer selection process. So Kansas is extremely excited about this announcement.
You bet.
Also, another thing that happened yesterday was all of our delegates, Kansas has 7 delegates, began their committee work. And the 6 committees that our delegates are working on are the nature and structure of delegate work at National FFA Convention, effective communication between national and chapter organizations, accommodating students with special needs, and agricultural education, CDE, the inclusion of unpaid SAEs, and chapter member programs and opportunities.
So those are the kinds of items that will be on the convention floor eventually, then it sounds. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
So it's going to be a very busy business convention, it would appear. And, of course, there are a number of other things going on. The opening session is this morning. You have a number of special speakers coming in throughout the duration of the convention. So tell us what you're looking forward to in particular, Riley.
Well, this coming convention, I am really excited, as this will be one of my first experiences doing a few more things at convention rather than just being here as a general member observing. So I actually have the opportunity to serve as a delegate for Kansas. And so with that, I've been partaking in countless delegate works and committee meetings over the next few days. And I really have the opportunity to give input, not only from my personal point of view, but also from the view of Kansas FFA members. And so I'm really excited to be able to have that opportunity and to be able to network and meet some very unique individuals from across the nation who are also serving in this position.
As you look at the expected agenda, and you mentioned the committee work and some of the items being addressed there, what do you think is probably the most highlighted topic or issue to be brought to the floor? Anything in particular?
Right. One of the biggest things that's been going around is the nature and structure of delegate work committee. This is something that's been a hot topic over the past few years, and they finally got it to come down to a committee meeting. What this committee really is focusing on is the reallocation or the restructuring of delegates per state. The delegate system as it is now is very similar to our United States House of Representatives systems, where each state is allowed a certain number of delegates based on population. And because of that, some of the smaller states are feeling as if they wish they could have a few more delegates versus some of the larger population states. And some of the suggestions that have been thrown out there are switching to a bicameral system where we have not only a House of Representatives-like chamber, but also a Senate-like chamber where every state will get 2 delegates. And so this has kind of been a very hot topic with a lot of differing views.
That will gin up quite a bit of deliberation, won't it?
Oh, yes, it will.
So that will be interesting to watch as the actual work of the convention unfolds over the next few days. And we do have, and we don't need to list them all today, but a number of Kansas FFA members who are up for honors and recognition beyond Kyler's nomination.
Yes. Actually, today marks the first day for our Career and Development event participation for the state of Kansas. Kansas has 25 CDE/LDE participants that will be representing the state of Kansas here at the national level.
So we will be tracking how they fare as they go through their various competitions and activities.
Yes, sir.
And then we will check in with you tomorrow and see what's happened today and in subsequent days as we visit with you. But in sum, Riley, it's a quite exciting event as always, and you're more than eager to get it rolling, it sounds.
Yes, I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to a great week here in Indianapolis.
Very good. We appreciate you taking a few moments out of your ultra-busy agenda as a delegate and otherwise at convention to visit with us, and we will talk with you again this same time tomorrow morning, Riley. Thank you for the update right here.
Thank you very much, and have a great day.
He is Riley Sleichter, the Kansas FFA state reporter, who is, again, among the many from Kansas attending the 2017 National FFA Convention, which continues into the weekend in Indianapolis. Taking us up to Stop, Look, and Listen for this week with Gus Vanderhoven. This calendar note: the Department of Agricultural Economics here at K-State is putting on the 69th annual series of Kansas Income Tax Institutes throughout the state of Kansas starting next week. In fact, there will be 3 institutes next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, October 31st through November the 1st in Garden City. Then Wednesday, Thursday, November 1st and 2nd in Colby, and November 2nd and 3rd next Thursday and Friday in Hayes. There will be further sessions taking place later on in November in Kansas City, Topeka, and Salina, as well as Wichita, plus one taking place in December in Pittsburgh, and there'll be a webinar from that Pittsburgh session available as well. Loads of topics important to agriculture to be covered in each of these, as tax practitioners are urged to attend and take them in, including a look at indirect costs of production, depreciation strategies, tax-related loss issues in agriculture. The Schedule J to manage farm income will be covered. IRS audit issues and agricultural C corporation penalties, and the cash method of accounting for farmers, as well as financial distresses, will be covered. And at a couple of the sessions in Garden City and Wichita specifically, there will be a session on casualty loss and disaster tax issues, those associated largely with the wildfire outbreaks, the Starbuck fire in southwest Kansas, and those that took place in south central Kansas as well, those at the Garden City and Wichita tax schools. Again, there's full information on the entire series of Kansas Income Tax Institutes throughout the state coming up in the weeks ahead at agmanager.info. One can register for these as well at agmanager.info. This is Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
I know people trespass. The temptation is too big.
That's Gus Vanderhoven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Even though I do not hunt, I understand hunting for meat. At this time of the year, I'm often asked for permission to hunt on our property. It's ideal for wildlife. It is a rich habitat. People have offered money to hunt, but the answer is no. No hunting on our place. Let deer, turkey, and quail find a haven, a place to withdraw. All I'm asking for is that I can observe them as they bounce away, showing their raised white tail, or hear a turkey call when I then imitate, and they call again. It's a laugh. Kanza, our dog, would find a nest with eggs in the spring and slobber an egg, until I told him, no more. We want turkeys. I know the people trespass. The temptation is too big. But it is my property, and I want people to respect that. But there's another reason. In Africa, people poach the ivory from elephants and rhinos. It's pure slaughter. Only recently, indigenous people have come to realize that people will pay to see and observe their wild game in the game reserves, and that more money flows in by supporting the tourist industry than killing the game and selling ivory. On a very small scale, that's how I feel. What I would not give to see the sky blackened again once more by the passenger pigeons. The same to watch geese fly. Here's a poem by Susan Else McBride, telling about a true incident which took place a few weeks ago near the tidewaters of Maine, where my friend lives. But it could have happened here, in our state, Kansas. By Susan Else McBride. Harold's goose. Come, put your head next to mine and look out over my shoulder. Our eyes will be flooded with nature's painting. Granite mounds holding the headland overlooking lime-green river grass, surrounded by bluer-than-sky water. In glassy surfaces done by light, rippled by the wind. This quiet tidal water that breathes in and out under a hidden moon is all we see, but not all there is. What's important here is what's invisible. Out there beyond the overlapping fingers of land, 6 rivers stumble together, then squeeze through a narrow jaw known as the chops. These are fierce waters, whirlpools and maelstroms that roil into a river, whose currents run swift and hard to a deep and endless sea. This matters because of what I want to tell you. Dozens of wild geese nested in the lime-green seagrass in the quiet water. For months my brother watched over them, counted their pairs, delighted in the yellow blur of goslings as they slipped from their nests, collected their parents' molting feathers. Floating on the rippling morning light, listened for their clamor of calls, when new feathers gave flight. His home had become their haven. They had become his joy. Then, one early autumn morning, gunshots popped like firecrackers, shattering the scene. "It's a massacre," he said in a phone message. "Feathers everywhere." A few mornings after, he noticed a single remaining pair, the female injured and sick, the gander hovering. When she died in the reeds along the shore, her mate remained. 3 days circled her with half-hearted barks. The quiet waters breathed in and out under an hidden moon. The body bobbed against the fish weir. My brother, waiting, expecting the changing tide, would gently pull her away. When it didn't, he climbed in a kayak, and with his paddle nudged the body towards the bow, then nosed her towards the chops. Slowly, bow and paddle found a peculiar rhythm, the kayak plying the water, a familiar grace. Recalling how she had stretched her neck in flight, wings slicing the thick summer air. Even before they reached the wild and headlong river, he felt her body loosening, saw her feathers float in a trail on the wave of the wake. After releasing her to the river that would take her out to the deep and unending sea, he turned the kayak, paddled back through the feathers, floating on the quiet waters that breathe in and out under a hidden moon, leaving his goose to what is invisible. This year, we started patch burning on part of our Flint Hills, the rangeland. While they burned, they counted 8 prairie chickens and saw 1 beautiful buck jump away. That's what I see here.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas, featured every Wednesday right here. And with that, our time is away for today. We'd let you know that each of our daily broadcasts is now available in podcast form in its entirety, and you can access that by going to the ksre.ksu.edu website. Click on the Radio Network tab there, then the Agriculture Today link. That'll take you to the instructions on how to subscribe to that podcast on your smartphone or other mobile device. Again, start by going to ksre.ksu.edu, click on the Radio Network tab, and then the Agriculture Today link. Check that out. Meantime, thanks for tuning in today. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.